The Grouch and her sunshine and the one algorithm I could not decode. Chapter 1. The Grouch and the Sunbeam. The lingering looks. The not-so-accidental touches. The innocent flirting. The finishing of each other's sentences. All signs that friendship has slipped into the dangerous, intoxicating space where something more waits. Navigating that space is far trickier than the easy banter of friends. It is deeper water, and the captain of this ship is suddenly charting unfamiliar seas. My very straight best friend. The one who asks my opinion on every man she meets. The one who stands at my door, soaked to the bone because she ran through a storm just to tell me her news. The one who crawls into my bed when thunder roars, who hugs me too tightly when she leaves, who remembers my birthday every year with blueberry cheesecake, my favorite. And now here she is, curled beside me on the couch, eating popcorn and debating the philosophies of life. I'm just saying, she insists, hands flying toward the ceiling, if you have no intention of carrying the relationship forward, why stir emotions? Why string someone along? There are enough lost souls already wandering aimlessly because of that. I nod absently, fingers wrestling with a beast of an algorithm that refuses to cooperate. I've done this 1,000 times, but the distraction beside me is impossible to code around. Raina, honey blonde hair, storm blue eyes, perfect lips, and endless energy, is far more dangerous than anything on my screen. She makes nothing make sense. She walks into my orbit, and I turn to clay in her hands. I close the laptop with a frustrated sigh. Coffee? Her whole face lights up. She leaps to her feet and throws her arms around my neck. Grouchy, the coffee at Hava Monocle Cafe is the best. Her breath grazes my ear and heat blooms low in my stomach. I clench my fists at my sides, resisting the urge to pull her close. For 7 years I've been in love with her. For 7 years I've watched her fall in and out of love, helped pick up her pieces, stayed the friend she could always rely on. And now her body presses into mine, and it is torture. My heart claws at my ribs. She must feel it or chooses to ignore it. Jesus, Raina, I murmur over her head. That's a 10-mile drive. Can we not just go down the street? She nudges her head beneath my chin and purrs, but the matcha is better at Hava, Grouch. Restraint shatters in shards at my feet. Fuck, I mutter. And agree. She squeals, kisses my cheek, and dances away to grab her bag. I sigh, heavy and helpless, then reach for my keys and jacket. She bounds into the passenger seat like a child with a new toy, radiant enough to make me swear I'd kill anyone who dared dim her light. The road to Hava Monocle Cafe is filled with music, her singing along and animated talk about nature and her next project. She doesn't need to work. She's a billionaire heir, but you'd never know it by her hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. And still, I remain silent. I choose her friendship over everything. Because losing her is the one thing I cannot survive. She was the only heir to her family's fortune, and when she turned 21, she became the youngest billionaire when her grandparents passed away. She supports various organizations and has stocks in various companies. But looking at her, I do not see a billionaire or someone that does not need to work. I see a free spirit and a very generous person. I, on the other hand, am a software engineer and code developer and run my own company. I am more of a freelancer to a group of companies, and I develop their software and write their programs, choosing solitude over boardrooms. I prefer it that way because I can work from my apartment and do not have to sit in boardrooms or deal with dinosaur board members or staff and people in general. I love what I do and the freedom it gives me. I am a contrast to this vibrant, outgoing person next to me. Dark clothing, dark hair, and somber makeup. Then to add it all together, I wear glasses and that, as Raina would put it, makes me unreachable. But she barges through all my walls and drags my sorry ass to all these exotic places, and I am helpless. When we met, I needed a specific screen for my triple screen setup in my then small apartment. Her family owned the electronics store, and she was behind the counter that day. I explained why I needed the monitor, and she convinced me to go for the bigger and better screen, but the price was astronomical, and I declined. But that day I learned that Raina Martinson does not take no for an answer. She said nonsense so nonchalant and rang up the screen and then continued to charge me the same price as the smaller computer monitor, which I was initially looking at. She called it an investment in my future and made me promise to stay in touch. I was back at the store 2 days later, and that's how our friendship started, at least for her. I fell for her on that first day already. Now looking at her smiling face, my heart clenched as I know I can never tell her how I actually feel about her. So, I remain silent and choose her friendship any day. She senses me looking at her and turns to me and smiles. Then she reaches across the console and places a hand on my thigh. The heat of her hand burns straight through my jeans and electricity shock races up my whole body. She is blissfully unaware of the effect she has on me, and I will not reveal any to her. The sign for Hava appears and I sigh thankfully. The close proximity to her is suffocating. I parked in front of the cafe and Raina dashed out of the car. She came around and hooked her arm through mine. "Oh, Grouch, this is great. Let's get matcha and black brew for you." I smirked and let her lead me inside the cafe. Chapter 2, Balinese Invite. 2 weeks later, I'm deep in code when my phone buzzes again and again. I don't need to look to know who it is. Distraction is lethal when it comes wrapped in honey blonde hair and stormy blue eyes. I finally pick up. "What?" "Grouch. I've been calling for 10 minutes. I know. I was ignoring you." Her laughter is sunshine through static. I rub my eyes and brace for the inevitable scheme. "What is it this time, Sonny?" "A holiday, Grouch. A proper holiday." My blood runs cold. Her schemes usually stay local. Now she's expanding territory. "You don't say. I want to take you to Bali. 2 weeks. Why I haven't kicked you out of my life after 7 years, I'll never know. You are detrimental to my health." She squeals so loud I hold the phone away. "You couldn't live without me, Grouchy. I'll be there in 10 minutes. And she is. She bursts through my door, leaps into my arms, and knocks the air from my chest. Torture, but I'll take it. She drags me to the couch, gushing about beaches, temples, and sunsets. When I try to protest, she storms to my desk and pulls my passport from the drawer. "Don't you dare say no. I'll attack you with hugs, kisses, and a million DMs. Arms crossed. Pout weaponized." I smirked as I got up and raised my hands in surrender. Okay. Jesus, you are insufferable." Her frown vanishes. She throws herself into my arms, radiant again. And I know I will go. I will keep her safe. Even if it kills me. Even if it means 2 weeks in paradise with the woman I can never confess to. "Now get out so I can finish my work." I mocked scolded. She laughs and kisses me on the cheek, then she leaves, and I stand alone in the wreckage. 2 weeks alone with Raina in a very romantic place. "Fuck, Emery Tahana, what are you doing?" I pull my glasses from my face and rub my eyes. Frustrated with myself and the cowardice. I stare at my laptop and the code that is still waiting for completion. This I understand. Code, algorithm, and software. I do not do relationships or sappy holidays with friends that I am in love with. I sat down and completed the code and closed the program. Next week, I will be in Bali with Raina and I will have fun, because I will not let her know how I feel or let anything happen to her. Pathetic Tahana, pathetic. Chapter 3, The Spice of Kuta. They landed in Bali and Emery knows that she will never be the same again. This will be the test of not just friendship, but also how deep can she still hide what she feels. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the two friends stepped off the tiny shuttle that had taken them from the airport to their bungalow in Kuta, their feet sinking into the soft, warm sand as if the beach itself were a familiar carpet. The air was thick with the scent of incense and sea salt, a heady mix that carried the promise of another day that could be both ordinary and unforgettable. Emery pulled the strap of her battered canvas backpack tighter around her shoulders, her eyebrows knitting together in that familiar, slightly annoyed expression that Raina called her permanent scowl. It was not that she was truly displeased with the world, she simply wore a mask of gruffness that made it easier to hide the swirling mess of feelings inside. Her dark eyes, however, flicked over the turquoise water with a softness that contradicted her outward demeanor. She watched Raina, radiant as ever, tilt her head back to stare at the sunrise, the golden light catching the honey strands woven into her hair. Raina laughed as she hopped onto a wooden surfboard that waited for her beside the thatch-roofed shack, her voice bright enough to drown out the market stalls, already setting up for the day. "Can you believe we're finally here?" she shouted over the chatter, her arms sweeping wide as if she could cradle the whole island in her embrace. Emery grunted, a sound that could have been mistaken for a cough if not for the hint of affection that lurked beneath it. "Just don't go drowning yourself in the surf. I don't want to be the one who has to pull you out." Raina turned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You're such a grouch, Em. That's why I love you." She nudged Emery's side with her hip, the gesture both playful and intimate, as if she were reminding the other that they were no longer strangers, but sisters forged in shared misery and late-night coffee runs. The word love hung in the air like a fragile lantern. For Emery, it held 1,000 meanings: friendship, admiration, a secret ache that clenched her chest each time Raina's laughter rang out. Her gruff exterior was a coat she pulled tighter whenever the world seemed to get too close. The truth was simple: she was in love with the sunshine that chased away her clouds. She could not say it. She could not even think of herself as more than the person who kept the lights on when Raina's phone died, who remembered to bring an extra bottle of water on their hikes, who, most importantly, knew the exact spot on Raina's palm where a tiny scar formed after a childhood bike accident. They spent the morning strolling through the bustling streets of Kuta, ducking into stalls that sold everything from hand-woven sarongs to pineapple-spiked sauté. Raina's eyes lit up at the sight of a stall filled with colorful batik fabrics, and she rushed over, dragging Emery behind her. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with a smile that seemed to have been painted on, greeted them with a fluid Selamat Pagi and began showcasing her wares. "Look at this one," Raina said, holding up a vivid orange scarf that matched the sunrise they had just watched. She slipped it around Emery's neck with a flourish. "It's for you. You need a little sunshine too." Emery blinked, feeling a heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the tropical humidity. "It's bright," she muttered, trying to sound nonchalant, but the way her fingers lingered on the soft cotton felt like an accidental confession. Raina's smile wavered for a heartbeat, as if she sensed something deeper behind the grumble. "You always say the same thing when you see something too bright. I've learned it's your way of saying you're impressed." Emery rolled her eyes, but beneath the sarcasm, a small, involuntary smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Maybe I'm just tired of your endless optimism. It's exhausting being around someone who never seems to notice the clouds." "You think you're the only one who sees clouds," Raina replied, crouching to stare at a small, half-eaten piece of mango. "But think about it, if I'm the sun, you have to be the rain that makes the garden grow. At least you get to make a difference." The comment lodged itself in Emery's mind the way a seed might find fertile soil. She let the words settle into the rhythm of her thoughts, and for the first time in years, she didn't rush to deflect them. Instead, she let them hover, a quiet acceptance that perhaps she was indeed the rain, steady, necessary, a balm for Raina's ever-burning spirit. Later that afternoon, they found themselves perched on the edge of a coral reef at the famed Padang Padang beach, the turquoise water lapping gently against the sand, the sun now a fierce overseer. Raina, ever the enthusiast, had insisted they try snorkeling. Emery, reluctant but unwilling to lose the chance to be close to her friend, had agreed. The water embraced them like a cool blanket. Emery's lungs filled with the briny taste of the sea as she slipped the mask over her eyes, her frantic thoughts finally quieted by the silent world beneath the surface. Fish of every hue flitted past like living pieces of stained glass. The reef was a riot of color, and for a fleeting moment Emery's heart seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the ocean. Raina's voice crackled through the snorkel as she swam beside her, her words bubbling up with excitement. "See that one? It's a clownfish. Look how it darts, just like you when you're trying to avoid the truth." Emery let out a small, muffled laugh. "Maybe I'm just good at hiding." Raina's eyes, still bright even underwater, found Emery's in a silent exchange. "You're not hiding, Em. You're protecting. You're protecting yourself from feeling something you think you can't have." The words struck a chord, reverberating through Emery's chest with a force she hadn't anticipated. She blinked, the water rippling around her lashes, and realized that the truth she so often shielded behind sarcasm could no longer remain unseen. When they resurfaced, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and orange fire. They lay side by side on their towels, the heat of the sand seeping into their skin. "Did you ever think about staying longer?" Raina asked, her tone softer than usual, as if she were treading lightly on a fragile glass. Emery stared at the horizon, watching the waves turn a deeper shade of indigo. "I thought about staying somewhere else. Somewhere where we don't have to pretend everything's fine." Raina turned her head, her hair framing her face like a halo. "You don't have to pretend with me, Em. Not with me." A sudden gust scattered a few stray grains of sand across Emery's cheek, and she brushed it away with a trembling hand. The wind carried the faint sound of a gamelan from a nearby temple, a melody that seemed both distant and intimate. "Raina," Emery whispered, "the name a prayer. What if I told you that I'm scared? That I'm scared of losing you, scared of breaking something that's already perfect." There was a pause, a heartbeat that stretched like the tide pulling away from the shore. Raina's smile softened, her eyes no longer the bright sparkles of always-on optimism, but a gentle pool reflecting something deeper. You're the only person who ever makes my world feel balanced," she said, her voice almost reverent. "You're stubborn, you're grumpy, you're me. And I don't know what you're afraid of, but I promise you this. Whatever you're feeling, whatever it is, I'll listen. I'll stay. I won't run away just because the sun feels too bright." The words wrapped around Emery like a warm blanket, a feeling she had never allowed herself to experience. The truth she had buried under layers of sarcasm and gruffness rose to the surface, trembling but beautiful. They stayed like that, watching the sun dip below the line where ocean met sky, the colors bleeding into a twilight that seemed to breathe life into something unspoken. The world around them continued its rhythmic chorus, distant drums, the laughter of other tourists, the faint call of a night bird. As darkness settled, they trudged back to their bungalow, the sand cool beneath their feet. The small wooden porch was illuminated by flickering lanterns, the gentle glow creating shadows that danced on the walls. Raina led Emery inside, closing the door behind them, the click echoing like a promise. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of incense, mixed with the salty tang of the sea, a reminder that they were still on the island, far from the concrete jungles they had escaped. Raina poured 2 glasses of coconut water, the liquid glistening in the lantern light. "Do you ever think about what comes after this?" Raina asked, taking a sip, her eyes never leaving Emery's. Emery stared into her own glass, the condensation tracing patterns that looked like tiny rivers. "Every day," she admitted, her voice low but steady. "I think about everything, what-ifs, maybes, and the things I'm too scared to say." Raina set her glass down and took Emery's hand, the warmth of her palm startling against the cool night. "Then let's make a promise," she said, her eyes solemn yet bright, "that we'll face all those what-ifs together. No pretenses, no masks. Just us. As we are." Emery felt a tremor in her chest that wasn't just the remnants of the day's heat. She squeezed Raina's hand, a quiet affirmation that surged through her like the tide that had carried them earlier. "I promise." The night outside was a tapestry of stars, each one a tiny beacon in the boundless sky. Inside, the 2 women sat on the floor, back to back, their heads resting against each other like 2 mismatched puzzle pieces, finally finding a place. The gruffness that had defined Emery for years seemed to melt away, replaced by a vulnerable softness she had never allowed herself to show. In the days that followed, the island revealed itself in layers, temples where monks chanted in rhythmic hum, rice paddies that stretched like emerald waves, markets where the air was perfumed with spices and fresh fruit. Raina's sunshine never dimmed. She led Emery through hidden waterfalls, taught her to surf on a small board, and named every coconut tree they passed, attributing to each a personality as vivid as the sunrise. Emery, in turn, began to let her guard down, though not completely. She still rolled her eyes when Raina tried to force her to smile at a street performer. She still muttered sarcastic comments about the heat. And she still pretended to be annoyed when Reina suggested they try a new dish. Yet, beneath those performances, there was an underlying current of tenderness, a rhythm of shared glances and quiet gestures that spoke louder than words. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of trekking up Mount Batter to watch the dawn from the summit, they found themselves back in their bungalow, bodies bruised but spirits high. The sky was a deep indigo, the stars flickering like distant lanterns. Reina flopped onto the floor, her legs stretched out, a blissful sigh escaping her. "You know," she said, looking up at the ceiling where a ceiling fan turned lazily, "I think I've found my favorite place on this island. It's not the beach, not the temple, not even the rice fields. It's right here, wherever we are together." Emery chuckled, a low, genuine sound that surprised even her. "You're impossible," she said, though her voice held a warmth that belied the tease. Reina turned her head, eyes bright with mischief and affection. "Maybe. But I'm also the only person who can make you laugh at sunrise and cry at sunset. And you, well, you keep me grounded. You're my rain." A gentle laugh escaped Emery, and she pulled Reina into a quick, tight hug. The air smelled of sandalwood and ocean, and the world seemed to pause for a heartbeat, honoring their unspoken pact. The next morning, as they walked hand in hand through the bustling night market, Emery's mind drifted to the first day they had arrived, when she had stepped off the shuttle with a scowl and a suitcase full of doubts. She realized that the grunt that had defined her for so long was no longer a shield, but a part of her that had finally been allowed to shine, because love, in its own quiet way, had taught her that even clouds need rain. Reina's laughter rang out as a vendor offered them a sample of fried banana, and Emery found herself genuinely smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She didn't know how the future would shape itself, whether the island's magic would linger after they returned to the concrete world, or if the tide of their feelings would ebb away. What she did know was that, in the space between sun and storm, she had finally found the courage to stand in the light, grumpy, flawed, and utterly, irrevocably in love. The night air wrapped around them like a soft blanket as they disappeared into the crowd, two silhouettes against a sea of lanterns, each step a promise, each breath a testament to the delicate dance of friendship and love that had taken root on the sun-kissed shores of Bali. Chapter 4. The sunshine disappeared. The Balinese sun, usually a gentle caress, felt like a physical weight on Emery's shoulders. It was their 8th day in Kuta, and the market was a symphony of chaos she had no desire to decode. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of ripening mangoes, the smoky tang of satay, and the overwhelming floral punch of frangipani, a scent she would forever after associate with a specific, gut-wrenching panic. "Come on, Grouch," Reina laughed, her voice the only clear note in the dissonant orchestra. She threaded her arm through Emery's, a gesture so familiar it was both an anchor and a torment. "Look at these. Hand-carved, each one unique." She held up a ridiculous wooden statue of a frog playing a guitar. Emery scowled, pushing her glasses up her nose. "It's a logistical nightmare. The sourcing of the wood, the inconsistent craftsmanship, the shipping costs. Your venture capital firm would have a collective aneurysm." Reina's smile didn't dim. It never did for long. She was a billionaire who found genuine, unironic joy in a $5 wooden frog. That was her magic. She was the sun, and Emery, for the last 7 years, had been a lonely planet in a steady, hopeless orbit, basking in the light, knowing she could never get closer without being consumed. "You code the world into ones and zeros, Em. I look for the things that can't be quantified," Reina said, placing the frog back with an affectionate pat. "Like the joy on someone's face when they get a perfectly ridiculous gift." Emery's heart performed a painful, familiar stutter. "Your joy," she thought. "It's always about your joy. I'd buy a million stupid frogs if it kept that look on your face." She said nothing. She never did. Her love for Reina was the most complex, bug-ridden code she'd ever written. Millions of lines of secret glances, suppressed smiles, and carefully catalogued memories, all hidden behind a firewall of grumpy pragmatism. It was the only way to keep the system running, to preserve the fragile stability of their friendship. To confess, would be to introduce a fatal error that would crash everything. I need to find a bathroom, Emery muttered, the heat and the internal tumult becoming unbearable. Okay, I'll be right here, Raina said, already turning her sunbeam attention to a stack of vibrant silk sarongs. Don't get lost in the code. The joke was an old one. Emery offered a weak, familiar grimace and melted into the crowd. The bathroom was a dim, slightly damp cubicle. Emery splashed water on her face, the tepid liquid doing little to cool the fever under her skin. She counted to 60, organizing her chaotic emotions into neat, manageable arrays. Out in 5 minutes. Back to Raina. Smile at her stupid purchases. Carry her bags. Keep the orbit steady. It was a simple algorithm, one she had followed for years. She emerged, blinking into the bright sunlight. She navigated back to the stall with the sarongs. The vibrant fabrics were there, fluttering in the breeze. The old woman selling them was there, haggling with a tourist. Raina was not. Emery's brow furrowed. She checked the next stall. The frog carvings. No Raina. A cold trickle, entirely separate from the humidity, traced a path down her spine. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tighter than usual. The vendor looked up. The woman. My friend. Very bright dress, smiling a lot. Was she here? The woman shrugged, speaking rapidly in Bahasa Indonesia. Emery's Indonesian was basic, but she caught the words gone and quickly. The cold trickle became an ice bath. Emery's mind, usually a sanctuary of logic and order, began to scream. She pushed through the crowd, her head swiveling, her vision tunneling. Raina, she called out, her voice lost in the market's din. Ray. No answering call. No flash of a brilliant yellow dress. A young boy tugged at her sleeve, holding out a necklace. She almost shook him off, but then she saw it. In his other hand. A phone. Raina's phone. Custom-designed, rose gold case with a small, smiling sun emblem, a gift from Emery last birthday. The world stopped. The market's noise faded into a distant, muffled roar. Emery's heart didn't beat. It was a cold, dead stone in her chest. She took the phone, her fingers numb. The screen was locked. The boy jabbered, pointing towards a narrow, grimy alley between two market stalls. He mimicked a struggle, a hand over a mouth, then held out his palm for money. The algorithm shattered. Every line of code, every protocol for calm and collected behavior was overwritten in a nanosecond. A new, terrifying program booted up. It was written in a language of pure, undiluted fear and rage. The grouchy cloud didn't dissipate. It turned into a thunderhead, crackling with lethal voltage. She shoved a fistful of crumpled rupiah at the boy and ran into the alley. It was empty, save for a few scattered trash cans and the lingering scent of diesel fumes. But there, on the dusty ground, lay a single earring. A tiny silver sun. Raina always said she wore them, so she'd never be without her light. Emery bent down, picking it up. The metal was warm from the sun. It was the last point of contact, the final data point before her sun was stolen from the sky. A sound escaped her, a raw, guttural thing that was half sob, half roar. She slammed her fist against the rough brick wall, the pain a sharp, clarifying spike in the overwhelming chaos. Think. Code. Find the error. Trace the breach. She ran back into the main street, not looking for Raina anymore. She was looking for a different variable. A connection. She found a terrified-looking Western tourist filming the chaos on her phone. Wi-Fi. Now. Password, Emery demanded, her voice low and razor-sharp, all traces of its usual gruffness replaced by a terrifying calm. The woman stammered out the password for a nearby cafe. Emery didn't thank her. She was already typing, her fingers a blur on Raina's phone. She bypassed the lock screen with a series of gestures only she knew, a backdoor she'd built into every device she ever gave Raina, a paranoid failsafe she never thought she'd use. She accessed the phone's remote backup. She cross-referenced its last activated microphone data with nearby public traffic camera feeds she began illegally accessing. Her mind was no longer human. It was a machine, a supercomputer of purpose. She saw the blur of a dark van. A partial license plate. She ran it through an algorithm she'd designed for a cybersecurity client, one that could extrapolate a full plate from a fragment and track its movement through a city's camera network. Each second that ticked by was a lifetime. Each failed query a fresh hell. But Emery did not break. The grumpy, socially awkward coder was gone. In her place was a creature of singular, terrifying focus. The love she had hidden so carefully, the love that she thought made her weak, was now a nuclear reactor at her core. It wasn't warm or gentle. It was the most powerful, destructive force on the planet. She found the van. It was heading north, toward the jungle-clad mountains. She didn't go to the police. Their protocols were too slow, their jurisdiction too limited. She had no limits. She called a number on her own phone, a number buried under layers of encryption. A man answered. Mason. It's Emery. What? Listen. Raina is gone. Taken. I am sending you a live feed of a van. I need a satellite lock. I need thermal imaging of the structures in its projected path. I need every piece of data on every known criminal outfit in Bali who specializes in high-value kidnappings. I need it 5 minutes ago. There was a pause at the other end. Mason was a private security consultant she'd worked with on corporate espionage cases. He'd never heard this tone in her voice. It was flat, cold, and absolute. Emery, that's a massive overwatch. The cost. Bill it to me. Liquidate my assets. Every stock, every bond, every fucking dollar. I don't care. Burn it all. I want a team, armed, on a helicopter, ready to go to the coordinates I send you in 10 minutes. And Mason? Yeah. Tell them the primary directive is extraction of the asset. The secondary directive is to not get in my way. She ended the call. She stood in the middle of the bustling market, a statue of vengeance in a cargo shorts and a geeky t-shirt. The gentle Balinese air hummed with the invisible traffic of data she was commanding, a digital war drum beating against the sky. She looked down at the tiny silver sun earring clenched in her white-knuckled fist. She thought of Raina, laugh, of her hopeless optimism, of the way she believed the world was fundamentally good. Emery knew better. The world was a system of vulnerabilities and exploits. And someone had just exploited the one thing that made her human. They had made a fatal error. They had taken her sunbeam, and now the Grouch would rain hellfire until she was found. The code was simple now, reduced to a single, brutal command line. Find her. Emery would tear this island apart, not with conventional weapons, but with the invisible, insidious power of data. She would strip its digital infrastructure bare, peel back its layers of privacy, dismantle its networks, track its every transaction, and sift through its every byte of information. She would unravel the very fabric of its connectivity until she found Raina. And woe betide anyone who stood in her way. Chapter 5. The Ghost in the Machine. The 10 minutes Mason had asked for felt like 10 eternities, each one measured by the frantic, thunderous beat of Emery's heart against her ribs. She stood motionless in the swirling chaos of the market, a dead spot in the current of humanity. Her eyes were no longer seeing the vibrant silks or smelling the cloying frangipani. They were fixed on the screen of her own phone, overlaid with a half-dozen command line interfaces and data streams she was puppeteering from Raina's device. Her world had been reduced to a 6-inch screen and a single, screaming imperative. A notification bloomed in the corner of her display, encrypted, Priority 1. Mason. Satellite lock acquired. Thermal SIGs detected at coordinates 8 degrees 24 minutes 36.0 seconds south, 115 degrees 7 minutes 39.0 seconds east. 2 structures. 1 main, 1 outbuilding. 6 heat signatures. 1 isolated. Smaller. Not moving. The isolated signature. Not moving. The cold stone in Emery's chest cracked, sending a fissure of pure terror through her. Not moving. Was it restraint? Unconsciousness? Something worse? Her mind, the traitorous machine, immediately began running probability scenarios, each more horrific than the last. She violently terminated the process. Error. File not found. She could not entertain that data. The asset was alive. The asset was waiting for extraction. That was the only acceptable variable. Team is wheels up. ETA 17 minutes. Stand by for live drone feed. 17 minutes. An aeon. Raina had been gone for 23 already. Every second was a lifetime of unknown suffering for her, a lifetime of corrosive hell for Emery. A new window flickered to life on her phone, a grainy, green-hued live feed from a military-grade drone now streaking over the Balinese jungle. It was following the digital breadcrumb trail she'd laid, the path of the van she was still tracking through every traffic and security camera she could forcibly conscript into her network. The van turned off a main road onto a dirt track, disappearing under a thick canopy of trees. The drone feed showed nothing but a twisting river of green. Visual lost. Maintaining thermal and signal lock. Of course, they'd want seclusion. Emery's fingers flew across the screen, pulling up geological survey maps of the region. The land sloped down there. There was a river. The compound would need a water source. She isolated the area, cross-referencing it with the last known coordinates of the van's faint GPS signal, a pinging heartbeat she was keeping alive through a brute force attack on the vehicle's outdated entertainment system. She had them. A 2-acre plot of jungle, 1.2 miles from the nearest road. The drone feed stabilized, hovering high above the canopy. The thermal imaging painted a ghostly picture, a main house, a smaller shed, and the 6 heat signatures. 5 were clustered together. 1 was alone in the main house. Stationary. A new data point seared into Emery's brain. The 5 clustered signatures were moving toward the isolated one. No. The word wasn't a thought, it was a system-wide crash. The carefully constructed dam of cold, hard logic broke. The image of those 5 blobs of light converging on the single, still one on Raina, unleashed the raw, screaming terror she had been suppressing. She couldn't wait 17 minutes. She couldn't stand here while they touched her. Her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the market with a new, desperate purpose. They landed on a row of parked motorbikes, the preferred mode of transport for every local and tourist. Most were modern, with immobilizers and electronic locks. A nightmare to hotwire. But tucked at the end was a relic. A beat-up Honda Win 125 cubic centimeters. A classic. Simple. Analog. Emery was moving before the plan was fully compiled. She strode to the bike, her movements economical and precise. She pulled a multi-tool from the pocket of her cargo shorts, a habit Raina always teased her for. Who carries a screwdriver to a beach? Right now I do, she thought, the irony a bitter pill. She ignored the lock, jamming the flathead screwdriver into the ignition slot and twisting with all her strength. The cheap metal housing groaned and gave way with a sickening crunch. She stripped the wires beneath, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. Touch red to blue, a spark, and the ancient engine sputtered to life with a ragged, roaring cough. She didn't hesitate. She slung her leg over the seat, Raina's phone gripped in her left hand like a lifeline, the live drone feed still streaming. She kicked the bike into gear and peeled out onto the street, leaving the stunned market behind. The warm Balinese air whipped at her face, but she felt no warmth. She was a missile, and the coordinates on her screen were the target. She weaved through traffic with a recklessness that was entirely foreign to her risk-averse nature. Horns blared. A truck swerved. She didn't care. Her entire being was focused on the path ahead and the glowing screen in her hand. She spoke into her phone, her voice a distorted rasp over the roar of the wind and the engine, patching through to Mason's team. Change of plan. I'm going in. ETA 7 minutes. A burst of static, then Mason's voice, sharp with alarm. Emery, stand down. That is a direct order. You are not equipped for a tactical entry. You will compromise the op. They're moving toward her now, she snarled, the words tearing from her throat. I am the only asset on site with a direct vested interest. Your secondary directive stands. Do not get in my way. Emery, for God's sake. She ended the transmission. She was alone again with the roar of the bike and the ghostly green feed on her phone. The 5 heat signatures were inside the main house now. With her. 7 minutes stretched into a forever of torment. The jungle closed in around the dirt road, dark and suffocating. The drone feed showed no change. The 5 signatures were still clustered around the one. Then, a new movement. One of the signatures broke away from the group and walked toward the back of the house. A 7th signature, previously unseen, appeared from the outbuilding, handing the first one a long, slender object. The thermal imaging couldn't show details, but the shape was unmistakable. It was the heat signature of a blade, warmed by the hand that now carried it back toward the main room. Toward Raina. Emery's blood turned to ice. The algorithm of vengeance finally, completely, overwrote the last vestiges of the woman known as Emery. She gunned the engine, the bike fishtailing on the loose dirt. She saw a break in the trees, a gate, a crude fence. The compound. She didn't stop. She aimed the bike directly at the weakest point of the wooden fence and braced for impact. The world exploded in a shower of splintered wood and noise. The bike crashed through, throwing her clear. She hit the damp ground, rolled, and came up running, ignoring the sharp pain in her shoulder. She was inside. The main house was 20 yards away. Light bled from a window. There was no more code. No more logic. No more plan. There was only the ghost in the machine, made flesh, and she was screaming her sunbeam's name as she ran toward the door. Chapter 6. No More Shadows. The world narrowed to the rickety, wooden door of the main house. Emery's shoulder screamed from the impact with the ground, but the pain was a distant, irrelevant data stream, easily quarantined and ignored. All processing power was focused on the threat behind the door and the asset within. The scream of her bike's crash had torn through the jungle's evening hum. Inside the house, the cluster of thermal signatures, the threats, jolted, scattering from their central position around the still one. They were moving, reacting. The element of surprise, however minimal, was hers. She didn't bother with the door. It was a variable. She went for the window. Launching herself forward, she crashed through the slatted wood and glass, landing in a crouch amidst the splinters in the main room of the shack. The scene imprinted itself on her brain with the brutal clarity of a system log. Room. Dim, single bare bulb. Concrete floor. Smell of sweat, clove cigarettes, and fear. Threats, 5 males. 2 near a table with cards and money, now scrambling. 1 by a filthy sink, turning. 2 standing over. Asset, Raina. Tied to a wooden chair. Her yellow dress was torn at the shoulder. A bruise was already blooming on her cheek. But her eyes, wide with terror, found Emery's. They weren't defeated. They were terrified, but fiercely, brilliantly alive. The man closest to Raina, the one holding the long, wicked parang knife, recovered first. He wasn't a professional. His face was a mask of startled greed, not cold calculation. This was a local gang way in over their heads. A fact Emery's rage immediately calculated into her odds. "Appa," he yelled, "what?" as Emery rose from her crouch. She didn't speak. Language was an unnecessary protocol. Her body was the argument. The man by the sink lunged first, grabbing for a crowbar. Emery didn't try to fight him. She redirected. She stepped inside his swing, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the wall beside the window she'd just shattered. He crumpled with a grunt. 1 threat neutralized. The 2 from the table came at her together. 1 swung a fist. Emery dropped low, the blow whistling over her head. She drove her multi-tool, still clutched in her hand, into the side of the second man's knee. He screamed, a short, sharp sound of agony, and went down. She came up under the first man's guard, her elbow connecting with his jaw with a sickening crack. 2 more threats down. It wasn't elegant martial arts. It was efficiency. It was the brutal application of force against critical system failures. She was debugging with violence. The remaining 2, including the leader with the parang, stared in shock. They'd expected a payoff, a nervous family member, maybe the police. They had not expected a whirlwind of quiet, grimy fury in a geek t-shirt. The leader's shock turned to anger. He made his second mistake. Instead of going for Emery, he turned and put the blade to Raina's throat. A hostage situation. A classic logic bomb. Stop. Or I cut her, he screamed, spittle flying. Emery froze. The cold logic returned. The variable had changed. Direct assault was no longer optimal. Raina's eyes were locked on hers. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else. A spark. A message. I'm here. I see you. The other thug, emboldened, smiled and started toward Emery, pulling out a knife of his own. This was the calculus of desperation. 2 targets. One imminent threat to the asset, one immediate threat to herself. Emery's hand, hidden by her leg, moved. She wasn't looking at her phone, but her fingers knew the touchscreen by heart. A swipe, a double tap, a hold. On the table, Raina's phone, which Emery had been using to stream everything to Mason, lit up. But it didn't just light up. Emery triggered the emergency function she'd built into it, a function that overrode all volume settings and sent a piercing, ultrasonic alarm screech directly into the microphone, live streaming it to the team. The sound was physically painful. A high-frequency shriek that felt like an ice pick to the eardrum. The leader with the parang flinched, his hands flying to his ears for a split second. A fatal error. It was all the opening Emery needed. She didn't go for the man coming at her. She moved with him. As he lunged with his knife, she grabbed his wrist, yanked him off balance, and used his body as a shield and a projectile, shoving him hard into the leader. The 2 men collided in a tangle of limbs and shouted curses. The parang clattered to the concrete floor. Emery was on it in an instant. She didn't pick it up. She kicked it, sending it skittering across the room into a dark corner. She didn't want a weapon. She wanted them helpless. The leader shoved his accomplice aside, his face a contorted mask of rage. He charged her, empty-handed now, a bull seeing red. Emery stood her ground. As he reached her, she simply sidestepped and drove the hardened plastic edge of her phone, held like a rock in her hand, into the nerve cluster at the side of his neck. He didn't scream. He made a gurgling sound and dropped like a sack of rice, his body seizing for a moment before going still. Neutralized. The last thug, the one with the stabbed knee, was trying to crawl toward the door. Emery walked over, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet, and delivered a precise, merciful kick to the back of his head. He stopped moving. Silence. The entire confrontation had taken less than 60 seconds. The only sounds were Emery's ragged breathing and the faint, fading ultrasonic whine from the phone on the table. She turned. Raina was still tied to the chair, staring at her. The tears that had been welling in her eyes finally spilled over, tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. But she wasn't looking at the unconscious men. She was looking only at Emery. Emery crossed the room, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was receding. She fell to her knees in front of the chair, her fingers fumbling with the rough ropes binding Raina's wrists. They were tight, cutting into her skin. "I'm sorry," Emery whispered, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry it took me so long." The words were illogical, inefficient. She couldn't stop them. The ropes came loose. Raina's hands were free. She didn't rub her wrists. She didn't stand up. She reached out. Her hands, trembling slightly, cupped Emery's face. Her thumbs gently wiped away the grime, and a tear Emery didn't even know she'd shed. Raina breathed, her voice a mix of awe, terror, and overwhelming relief. "My God, You came through the window." A sob choked out of Emery, a raw, broken thing. She collapsed forward, her forehead resting against Raina's knee, her body finally giving in to the tremors she'd been suppressing. She clung to the fabric of the ruined yellow dress, anchoring herself in the reality of Raina's presence. Outside, the thunderous roar of a helicopter descended, its searchlight cutting through the jungle night, painting the scene in stark, blinding white. Mason's team. Right on time for the cleanup. But for a long moment, inside that shattered, bloody shack, there was no one else in the world. Just the grumpy coder who had finally, violently, broken out of her code, and the sunbeam who had never needed saving, only her. Raina leaned down, her voice a soft whisper against Emery's hair. "You're not just a grouchy cloud," she said. You're my whole damn storm. And in the chaos of the arriving commandos and the blinding light, Emery finally, truly, understood her own programming. She hadn't been built to orbit the sun. She had been built to be its shield. Chapter 7. The Quiet After the Storm. The ride back to their villa in Kuta was a silent, pressurized thing. Mason's team, all professional efficiency, had handled the scene with a cold competence that left no room for questions. The kidnappers were loaded into a different vehicle. Emery and Raina were ushered into a blacked-out SUV, a thick blanket wrapped around Raina's shoulders, a bottle of water thrust into Emery's shaking hands. They didn't speak. Raina stared out the window at the passing jungle, her face pale but composed, one hand clutching the silver sun earring Emery had returned to her. Emery stared at her own hands, seeing the scrapes, the smears of dirt and blood that wasn't hers. The code was gone. The mission was complete. All that was left was the terrifying, raw silence between them and the ghost of what she had done, what she had revealed. The villa felt like a museum of a life that had existed just hours before. The half-finished coding project on the laptop open on the dining table. Raina's bright sarong tossed over a chair. The novel she'd been reading, face down on the arm of the sofa. It was all unbearably normal, a stark contrast to the violence that had just rewritten their world. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence became a physical presence. Emery started, her voice gravelly. Do you want, Raina said at the same time. They stopped. A flicker of the old rhythm, now out of sync. You first, Emery mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. Raina took a slow breath. I think I need a shower. 2. Wash today off. Emery just nodded, a sharp, jerky movement. Right. Yes. Of course. She stood rooted to the spot, listening to Raina's footsteps fade down the tiled hall, followed by the soft click of the bathroom door and the eventual rush of water. The sound unleashed a torrent of data in Emery's mind she couldn't suppress. Images of Raina tied to the chair, the bruise on her cheek, the man with the knife. The parang clattering on the floor. The sickening crack of bone under her elbow. Her knees gave way. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. She didn't cry. She just shut down. The system had no commands left to execute. She didn't know how long she sat there. The water stopped. After a while, Raina emerged, dressed in soft cotton pajamas, her hair damp and curling around her shoulders. She smelled of lavender soap and safety. She walked over and sat on the sofa next to Emery, not touching but close. The space between them hummed with unspoken words. The police, Raina began softly. Mason's people are handling it, Emery said, her voice flat. It'll be treated as an attempted robbery gone wrong. It's cleaner that way. For your company's PR. For everything. You thought of everything, Raina said, and it wasn't quite a question. Emery finally looked at her. I didn't think. I just reacted. I had backdoors in your phone. I called in favors from people I shouldn't even know. I stole a motorcycle, Ray. I crushed it through a fence. I hurt those men. I could have. Her voice broke. I could have gotten you killed. Raina was silent for a long moment, just looking at her. Looking at the grumpy coder who had turned into a vengeful god and then collapsed back into a trembling, guilt-ridden woman. No, Raina said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. You saved me. All of that, the backdoors, the motorcycle, the violence, that was you saving me. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the angry scrape on Emery's forearm. This is the part one never saw. The part you keep hidden behind your firewalls and your grumpy comments. Emery flinched. It's not a good part, Raina. It's ugly. It's dangerous. It's devoted, Raina countered, her eyes shining. It's the part that would burn down the whole world for me. Do you have any idea how that feels? To be loved like that. The word hung in the air between them. Loved. The fatal error. The system-crashing confession. Emery opened her mouth to deny it, to retreat behind her walls, to say it was just friendship, just duty. But she couldn't. The code had been compiled. There was no going back to the source. She looked away, her throat tight. It's terrifying, she whispered. Raina's hand moved from her arm to her chin, gently turning her face back. Look at me, Em. Reluctantly, Emery obeyed. The vacation's over, Raina said softly. Let's go home. Not to avoid this, but to start what comes next. Without the ghosts here. Emery just nodded, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. The thought of LA, of their familiar apartments, of her quiet, ordered life, felt like a lifeline. The flight home the next day was a world away from their flight to Bali. They sat side by side, but the easy silence was gone, replaced by a heavy, conscious awareness. Raina's hand rested on the armrest between them. After an hour of staring at the sea back in front of her, Emery slowly, hesitantly, placed her own hand over it. Raina didn't look at her, just turned her hand over and laced their fingers together. They stayed that way for the rest of the flight, a single, steady point of connection as they flew away from the nightmare. Back in LA, in the cool, minimalist silence of Emery's apartment, the world felt both familiar and utterly changed. Raina was there, because of course she was. She couldn't be alone. Emery couldn't let her be. They ordered takeout. They didn't talk about it. They talked about everything else. The pile of work emails, the weird movie on TV, the fact that Emery's plants had survived. It was late. Raina was curled on one end of the sofa, a blanket pulled up to her chin, finally asleep. The brave face she'd worn all day had softened into something vulnerable and peaceful. Emery sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, watching her sleep. The frantic, desperate energy was gone, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion in its place. And something else. A fragile, terrifying hope. The love was no longer a hidden subroutine. It was the entire operating system, now running in the open, vulnerable to every crash and bug. It was the most terrifying code she had ever written. But as she watched Raina sleep, safe in her apartment, safe because of her, Emery knew she wouldn't have coded it any other way. The grouchy cloud had found its purpose, and it wasn't to rain on the sunbeam, but to shelter it. She reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from Raina's forehead. I'm here, she whispered into the quiet of the room, a promise to them both. The firewall's down. I'm right here. Chapter 8. The New Protocol. The weeks that followed were a study in a new, careful normal. Raina's penthouse felt too big, too empty, too full of staff who looked at her with a new, pitying caution. So, she stayed at Emery's. It wasn't a discussion. It was a fact, as immutable as code. Emery's apartment, once a temple of ordered silence, became something else. A bright yellow dress hung next to a gray hoodie in the closet. The kitchen, formerly used for coffee and microwave meals, now often smelled of the elaborate, comfort food meals Raina insisted on cooking. The quiet was punctuated by the soft sound of Raina's video calls with her board of directors, her voice steadily reclaiming its sunny confidence. They didn't talk about Bali. They spoke around it. They were hyper-aware of each other's space, a dance of careful proximity. A blanket shared on the couch. A cup of tea made without asking. A lingering look held a second too long before one of them glanced away. Emery found her grumpiness had softened into a watchful, protective quiet. She wasn't coding to escape. She was coding at her kitchen table, her presence a silent anchor for Raina. She'd built a new security protocol for Raina's phone, one even more sophisticated, a fact Raina knew but never commented on. One evening, Raina was curled on the sofa, scrolling through photos on her laptop. Emery was across from her, debugging a script, the rhythmic tap of her keys a familiar soundtrack. Look, Raina said softly, turning the laptop around. It was a picture from the market, just minutes before. Emery, scowling ferociously at the wooden frog, while Raina laughed beside her, her head thrown back in joy. You looked so miserable. I was calculating the environmental impact of mass-produced novelty carvings, Emery muttered, but her eyes were on the photo. On the unguarded adoration in her own eyes as she looked at Raina, a look she thought she'd hidden behind the scowl. I know, Raina said, her smile gentle. But you were there. You always are. She closed the laptop. The room was quiet except for the hum of the computer. You never leave, Em. Even when I drag you to terrible parties or make you look at ridiculous frog statues. You just grumble and follow. Emery's fingers stilled on the keyboard. This was skirting dangerously close to the unspoken thing. The new, fragile operating system felt like it might crash. It's not a hardship, she said, the words inadequate. I know that, too, Raina whispered. Later that night, Emery was digging through a drawer for a spare charger when Raina called from the living room. Where's my O? Emery turned. Raina was standing by the bookcase, not looking for anything. She was holding a small, carved wooden frog. The one from the market. The one she'd put back on the stall. You bought it, Raina said, her voice full of wonder. She turned it over in her hands. Emery felt her face grow warm. It was a foolish, sentimental impulse, bought in the frantic, desperate minutes while waiting for Mason's call. A token. A stupid, quantified piece of joy. It was a data point, she said lamely, looking away. Raina didn't reply. She just placed the frog carefully back on the shelf, her movements deliberate. When Emery dared to look back, Raina was watching her, an expression on her face that Emery couldn't parse. It was deep and soft and heartbreakingly serious. The moment stretched, thick with everything unsaid. Then Raina took a slow breath. I think I'll go to bed, she said, her voice a little unsteady. Don't stay up too late debugging the world, okay? Emery just nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. The firewall was trembling. The next morning, Emery was already at the table, 3 screens glowing with lines of code, a fortress against the vulnerability of the night before. Raina padded out, her hair a mess, wrapped in one of Emery's oversized sweaters. She went straight to the coffee machine, a morning ritual. But instead of taking her mug to the couch, she came to the table. She set the mug down and placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. I figured it out, she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. No trace of sleepiness. No trace of sunshine. It was the voice she used in boardrooms when she was about to secure a deal that mattered. Emery's blood went cold. Figured what out? The illegal satellite feeds? The backdoors? The fact that her love was a terrifying, obsessive thing? Figured what out? She asked, her own voice sounding distant. Raina's gaze was unwavering. The algorithm. Emery's breath hitched. She couldn't speak. The one you've been running for 7 years, Raina continued, her eyes soft but relentless. The one with millions of lines of code. The one where the primary input is me. Where the output is, you. Showing up. Every time. Grumbling, but always there. Building firewalls to keep me safe. Buying stupid frogs because you thought it would make me smile. Her voice cracked slightly. Crashing through windows for me. Tears were welling in Raina's eyes, but she wasn't sad. She was triumphant. The variable I could never quantify, she whispered. The thing that couldn't be calculated. It was so simple. It was just you, Emery. It was always you. The world stopped. Every line of code on the screens behind her blurred into meaningless noise. The carefully constructed walls, the firewalls, the protocols, they didn't just come down. They evaporated. Emery looked down at her hands, then back up at the woman who had been her son, her best friend, her reason for breathing. The woman who saw her, all of her, and didn't flinch. The output was love, Emery said, the words a raw, quiet confession finally spoken into the silence. It was always love. It's the only command I ever really understood. Raina let out a soft, shuddering breath that was half a laugh, half a sob. She moved around the table, and Emery stood up to meet her, her chair scraping back. There was no more hesitation. No more space between them. Raina reached up and cupped Emery's face, her thumbs stroking her cheeks. The feeling was mutual, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The system was just slow to process it. I think I've always loved you too. I was just waiting for you to compile. And then she kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of fiery passion, but of coming home. It was gentle and sure, and tasted of coffee and 7 years of friendship and a future finally, beautifully, unlocked. It was the final, perfect line of code that made the entire program make sense. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, Emery felt a smile spread across her face, a real, unguarded, ungrumpy smile. It felt strange on her lips. It felt right. Raina beamed back. Her sunshine smile now meant entirely for her. "There it is," she whispered. "I've been trying to debug that for years." Emery laughed, a real, free sound that echoed in her sunlit apartment. The grouchy coder was gone. In her place was just a woman, hopelessly, perfectly, in love with her best friend. The system was finally, gloriously, optimized. The kiss didn't end so much as it softened, transforming into a silent, breathless conversation. Foreheads still pressed together, eyes closed, they simply breathed each other in. The frantic hammering of Emery's heart began to slow, syncing with the steady rhythm of Raina's. The world, which had narrowed to the point of their lips meeting, began to expand again, but differently. It wasn't the noisy market of Bali or the sterile silence of her apartment. It was a new world, built just for them, warm and quiet and safe. Raina's thumbs were still stroking her cheeks, wiping away tears Emery hadn't even felt fall. "Hey," Raina whispered, her voice husky. "You okay?" Emery let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "I have no data on what okay is supposed to feel like right now. This is an undefined variable." She opened her eyes. Raina was so close, her gaze soft and unwavering. "But the initial readouts are overwhelmingly positive." Raina's smile was a sunrise. "Good." She leaned in and kissed her again, briefly, sweetly. "We can run more tests. Extensive testing is recommended." This time, Emery initiated the kiss. It was less hesitant, more sure. It was the physical manifestation of a truth she had finally given herself permission to speak. Her hands, which had been hanging awkwardly at her sides, came up to rest on Raina's hips, anchoring her there. They broke apart again, but the space between them was gone. Raina slid her arms around Emery's neck, playing with the short hairs at her nape. Emery's hands settled at the small of Raina's back, holding her close. "I was so scared," Emery admitted, the words muffled against Raina's hair. "Not just in Bali. Before. Every day. That you'd see it. That you'd run." "See what?" Raina murmured, pulling back just enough to look at her. "That the most brilliant, loyal, fierce person I've ever known loved me?" The horror. Her tone was light, but her eyes were serious. "I'm not going anywhere, Em. You're stuck with me. You're my primary operating system." The geeky metaphor, coming from her, made Emery's heart swell. She finally understood what Raina meant about unquantifiable joy. It was this. It was the feeling of being fully seen and fully accepted, every grumpy, code-obsessed, fiercely protective part of her. They spent the day there, in the soft light of the apartment. They migrated from the kitchen to the sofa, a tangle of limbs and quiet conversation. They talked about it all, the silly moments over the years that now made perfect sense, the times they'd almost crossed the line, the terrifying, clarifying event in Bali that had forced the final compile. It was no longer a wound to be avoided, but a part of their story to be integrated. A dark chapter that had led them here, to this light. Time, which had once been measured in code sprints and board meetings, began to measure itself in softer increments. The first time Emery woke up with Raina in her arms, not from a nightmare, but from the simple, profound peace of her presence. The first time Raina left a pot of terrible, overbrewed coffee on Emery's desk without a word, just a kiss on the top of her head. The first time they went to a party together, and Emery didn't grumble in the corner. She stood by Raina's side, their fingers loosely linked, content to just be near her sunbeam, who now shone for her alone. Raina's billion-dollar smile became a frequent sight in Emery's apartment. It was there in the morning over coffee. It was there in the evening, when she'd drag Emery away from her screens to watch a movie. It was there when she'd find the little things Emery did, a new security patch for her company's servers, a perfectly organized spreadsheet for her charity gala, a second ridiculous wooden frog added to the shelf. Emery's grumpiness became a beloved language between them. A fond eye-roll was a term of endearment. A muttered complaint about inefficient use of kitchen space was met with a laugh and a kiss that efficiently silenced her. They built a life. It wasn't a dramatic overhaul. It was a seamless integration. Raina's vibrant, open-hearted world gently expanded to include Emery's quiet, ordered one, and in return, Emery's world was flooded with a light she never knew she craved. 1 year later, almost to the day, they stood on the balcony of a new apartment, theirs together. It had a dedicated office for Emery, with soundproofing and the best monitors money could buy. It had a sprawling terrace for Raina, filled with bright flowers and a view of the city lights. Below them, Los Angeles glittered, a network of possibilities. Raina leaned back against Emery, who wrapped her arms around her from behind, resting her chin on Raina's shoulder. "It's a good view," Emery murmured. "It's a perfect view," Raina corrected, tilting her head to kiss Emery's cheek. "The best one ever coded." Emery smiled, holding her closer. The grouchy coder had found her sunbeam, and the sunbeam had found her shelter. The program was running perfectly. No fatal errors. No bugs. Just an endless, optimized loop of joy. And for the first time in her life, Emery had no desire to debug a single thing. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.